So I want to talk about the TikTok ban or possible ban that is being discussed right now. So it's 2023, and I think long story short, if it was to be banned, we are at a start of a, a very difficult time, I think, in terms of what to do with businesses that make us uncomfortable. Um, and it will be the start of something that's really new within global culture. It's been going on for like 10 years, ever since so I wanted to talk about this is my view. It may not be the right view, but I think that there is something that's going on. And there's sort of two conflating factors, I think. Um, that so back in 2008 with the financial crisis, I think actually there's probably a little bit more, even goes back a little further than that, I think. um, it goes back to 9/11, where we went and we did things that we went through a war. America and I believe Britain at the time went into Iraq. That was not necessarily as well justified in public opinion as going into Afghanistan after 9/11. And I think, like, publicly, I think the United Nations was fully backing what was going on in Afghanistan in terms of nation building. But, there wasn't as much support to go into Iraq. And then, fast forward to 2008 with the financial crisis, where a lot of people did get hurt and a lot of people have much less trust in the institutions that currently exist in American culture. And this is the sort of third overarching factor that's going on that is relatively new, is the democratization of content creation, which is really quite a novel thing. And we have to face much different ways of dealing with this because of the public creation of knowledge that didn't necessarily wasn't as um, far reaching as it is today, in that the people years ago, before the advent of social media, and I don't like that term, it's more like content production platforms, I guess. Before the advent of that, it would only be people that had a significant voice that people would actually hear. And yes, that was completely undemocratic in many different ways, because not everybody would get that voice. And it would be very difficult to actually get that voice. So it locked out a lot of people. But that also means that there is a lot of voice that 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 say things today that are not necessarily sort of good for the economy, good for the world, good for being around. I go onto Facebook and I can't stand it. It is um, a lot of, especially when I basically have left Facebook, other than using it as for content creation to make people feel better. But I don't go on it anymore because it became such a sort of hate fields area of my life that I just didn't chose not to be on it. I didn't like any of that. And we've created these institutions that have become very important in our life, being the social media, and there's lots of value. I'm not saying that they're valueless. In fact, I think that there's tremendous value with having these institutions. Now, there's another sort of overarching thing that's been going on, is people have become a lot more uneasy with international relations. And I think I think that uneasiness has always been around for a long time, because, outside world, the outside world, is uncomfortable for all of this, and it's becoming in the public domain, and there's public discussion about foreign interests and what that actually means. Now, I'm not saying that foreign interests, in particularly to TikTok. I'm not saying that there isn't a very real possibility, a very real possibility. I'm going to stress that foreign influence is playing a role in what's happening. And yes, if I was to design a machine that would create instability in a nation, I would create in modern culture, I would create some sort of social media platform that was really fun and exciting to use and get people to do uncomfortable things every once in a while um, that were at risk, or people that were very susceptible to doing those things. However, the problem is you look at other platforms, Twitter, Facebook, all of the competitors. The only one I don't see, but there was a moment in time where it was doing that, was YouTube, where it would influence. But I still see there's definitely, even podcasts, all of these platforms. There are influential people that say and do uncomfortable things that get people to get people to do very uncomfortable things that are not good for society in general, because of the mass audience that they have. So centering out TikTok is a little uncomfortable from that particular perspective, other than the fact that it could be foreign influence that's actually doing that. It's not necessarily the fact that these acts are actually happening, but it's the fact that there's foreign influence. Now, if it was inside the country that these acts were happening, people, I think, would be more comfortable with that. But there's something, in particularly in American culture, that um, that 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 people feel uncomfortable with the outside, and it's very real with how this actually all plays out, with how people feel uncomfortable with it. Now, the complication is that on these other platforms, the people that are saying uncomfortable things and getting people to do uncomfortable things, say on Facebook, for example, man, it is hard not to suggest that there is not foreign influence on those particular platforms as well. So it's this really complicated, messy thing that, um, it's just very messy, in that there's much going on, that it's not a clear cut line where a single entity is at wrong, that there's not, if you start breaking it down, there's likely, um, I can't say for sure, but there's alleged foreign influence, but the evidence suggests very strongly that there is, in all of the platforms. And even politicians, do I believe that politicians and business leaders are not influenced by foreign influence? Absolutely not. I think that would be silly to assume that. I think that that is very real, a part of culture, of world culture. And we're at a moment, this is this kind of an interesting thing, that if we do make a case of this and it becomes something, I'm more nervous of what this says, as sort of the moral hazard behind it. In the sense that there might be some larger unintended consequences, both on the political side, where one might be nervous about larger implications in terms of what another country might do to the safety of the citizens, in America. And that's a real, that is something I'm concerned about, in terms of what, if you were to do something like that, what is the retaliative effort, not just from another country, from the one that you're targeting, but from many other countries that might take offense to this. That's an uncomfortable thing. But then the other uncomfortable thing is, what does that do for business when um, politicians are determining what businesses can run and stay here? And I'm not saying that this is not new. In fact, you know, politics, institutions play an enormous role in business, and they always have. I mean, think about the banking system. The FDIC is a pseudo government entity that will step in when banks fail. In Canada, there was the economic development corporation that is basically a government entity that would, and it's sort of pseudo private, that would interfere to make sure that the organizations would function properly and get access to more capital, and making sure that they can do business more effectively. And in that, these are real entities that exist today that have political influence, that have political ties. So I'm not saying that these, politics does not interfere with business. I think that would be really absurd for me to say that. And I'm not saying that institutions are not important to sort of set up guidelines within how business should be done and what that actually looks like. But it's an uncomfortable moment when people set up something that has has a lot of tremendous value on the face of it. When you use TikTok, it has enormous value compared to the existing platforms. And the existing platforms, and here's the sort of twist, is that the existing platforms know it. It is a better platform to get the word out. And you could see the reason why I know that is you look at all their competitive, very strong competitive reactions that they've done, where they've built a lot of the virality into the existing platforms like Facebook Reels and things like that, which are making their services better. Um, so, and do I think that these other players in the marketplace are innocent and not trying to manipulate the market so that they have a competitive advantage? Absolutely not. I think people do have that tendency, and organizations have this tendency to protect their interests, right? So this is a very challenging time in terms of what happens. And I see merit on both sides of what's actually of the spectrum. I do see that there might be foreign influence, and that makes me uncomfortable, obviously. But do I think that Lamborghini, for example, it doesn't have foreign influence in terms of the government interfering with Lamborghini? Um, in Italy, that would be a hard argument for me to believe, and it's also a hard argument to say that, hey, any product that is significant from another country, do I believe that that government doesn't interfere to make sure that it runs effectively? Well, man, that's a hard argument. You look at Embraer from Brazil. Do I believe the Brazilian government doesn't make sure that it does everything possible to make sure that that thing is running and doesn't have influence around the world? Absolutely. They're doing that in various different ways. So it's a challenging, difficult question in terms of what implications will result from this. In the sense that, do I think any of the parties are innocent? No. Do I think that it's a complicated issue? It, and the biggest thing to worry about, I think, is the long run implications of what this actually sets up for business culture and how we compete. Um, is it that for example, if you're in another industry, I mean, it's an easy argument to make if this does play out, to say, hey, there's these foreign influence that these foreign folks are interfering in this market. We need to step in and change this. and we need to have more protectionist boundaries there. And I think that's a complicated, difficult answer. We know that, you know, barring without, all of this sort of political interest and all this sort of complicated stuff that's going on and spying and all that kind of stuff, we know that trade is good. Having access to a larger market is good. It generally benefits the economy for consumers. So putting up barriers to trade is a complicated issue in many different ways. And it makes it more complicated when it's information technology, and it even makes it more complicated when a huge swath of the economy, a huge swath of constituents are actually using it, and maybe the ones that are most vulnerable. However, I do believe that Facebook and other competitors do the same thing, that there is some very vulnerable populations and older populations on Facebook that are getting access to Facebook, um, and maybe perhaps shouldn't be getting access to that information because it's harmful. So it's just a very complicated issue. I don't think that this is going to be resolved. I don't think anybody is, I wouldn't past, just from experience, people do that are incentivized do not great things. And we should be somewhat skeptical of all parties involved, even the content creators themselves. Um, And I don't know what the right answer is, to be honest. I really don't know. I think this is a moment that America would be better served with the TikTok ban to not let it be done by politicians, but have a vote, to have a referendum, because it's such an important topic to decide what they should actually do, and and think about what is the appropriate response. Do I think that there won't be foreign influence in a referendum? I mean, I think foreign influence is a big part of culture today. Do I think that people will get that referendum right and have the right response? Um, Probably not. I mean, we saw this with Brexit. It was a really complicated issue, and it still is a complicated issue today. So this is fascinating times, is all I can say. Do I think that whatever gets chosen is going to be the right answer? No. Do I think what gets rejected is the right answer? No. And it's just a complicated, difficult thing to think through. All right, take care and have a wonderful day.